I'll get some coffee while you do that. Right? So you have all had your own missions experiences, and you have your ideas about missions, and kind of like piggybacking off of the chapel, you know, when it comes to missions, there's that hindsight where you look at how missions has been done in the past and what missionaries have done who have gone before you. You look at your own present experience of what you're facing and doing in missions right now, particularly with what we do with Pacific Rim Missions. And then you're also trying to forecast like consequences and outcomes for the future. Like, if I do this in missions, what will the result be? And so it was a good, you know, reminder, the chapel message, in the sense of you can also use those principles in regard to looking down the road and your future in mission. So whenever I entered into the ministry, I knew that God had called me to preach, but I did not necessarily know what particular avenue. Like, my dad was a longtime pastor, and I thought, well, maybe God wants me to pastor. And so when I was in Bible college, I was exposed to a lot of different types of ministry. One of those was, like, they called it Mission Prayer Band, where what you guys do with the global outreach prayer you had on Monday night. And so I was exposed to that. And then I was exposed to, like, camp work, going to be working at camp this summer. And then I was exposed to some, like, evangelistic type of ministry. And I just really wasn't sure, you know, like, does God want me to pastor? Does he want me to be an evangelist? Does he want me to work at a camp? Does he want me to be a missionary? And you know, you're young, you're in your early 20s, you're like, you know, what's that going to look like? What's it going to morph into? And now that I'm 60 and fully engaged in missions around the world, it's like, it's just kind of neat to see how God charts that course and that path for you. So my first discussion with you today, or encouragement for you today, is just for you personally, okay? What is it going to look like for me personally to get involved in missions? And the first thing I would say to you is, like, just be patient and let God chart that course for you. Because sometimes the best missionaries get to the field or become engaged in missions experience in very unique ways. Like, I've met missionaries who were like, yeah, I worked in this factory for 20 years, and then God called me to the field, and I went and raised support. And and it's like the experience that I had working in the factory, and it's so, and it's like, okay, I wouldn't have expected that, you know, but that's the course that God charted for them. You might be getting a lot of different types of ministry experience, like right now. Like, oh, I did an internship in this church. I worked at this camp. I'm going to Bible college. You might even be like, I don't know, I haven't had a lot of experiences right now. That's okay. God is going to use your unique upbringing, background, experiences, because sometimes the things that we lack, sometimes we think of as limitations. Like, some people think, oh, my parents weren't missionaries, I wasn't raised on the field. So that's okay. I just kind of grew up in a home where my dad and my mom worked a job, and I went to school, and you'll make a great missionary. Okay? That's the experience God has for you. Sometimes people are like, well, you probably got a head start because your dad was a pastor. And no, that's just unique to me. God has a unique place for you. So don't ever look at the experiences you have had or the lack of experiences and say, well, can I really be used? Am I gifted? Is missions going to work out for me? Or no, just you see, and I know you could testify to this, you see a lot of people that get to the mission field and they have varied experiences, backgrounds. Sometimes some people tend to think, oh man, I grew up in an unsaved home and I had no biblical training. I didn't even get saved till I even went to Bible college and got saved in Bible college. And God's probably, it's going to be hard for him to use me with that. No, that's the perfect background to have to be able to be used of God. And so as you are personally thinking about missions, God has you right where he wants you to be in all of your uniqueness, okay? Your experiences, your background, your ministry experiences. And so don't ever be thinking in terms of missions like, probably would have been better if I grew up as an MK, missionary kid. Yeah, probably would have helped me if I, like my parents were in the ministry. Yeah, probably would have helped me if I grew up in a Christian home and had all that when I was, a child. Yeah, no, don't just let God take you with where you are and who you are and make you into the person that he wants you to be. And I think really you don't have to look any further than the scriptures for this. When you think about Jesus and the men that he chose to be his disciples, right? Varied backgrounds, varied temperaments, varied personalities, varied professions, from tax collectors to fishermen, right? From impetuous people like Peter, like sons of thunder, James and John, very judgmental, very aggressive, to Thomas, who's like, well, I don't know, and has some emotional and trust challenges with people. So just let God take you and mold you with all of your uniqueness and all of your experiences, and don't ever look on anything that you have experienced or have not experienced and say, I don't know if I know. All of that just kind of comes together, molds together, gels together. And I say all of that to lead up to this point. So I didn't know what I wanted to do in the ministry. I just knew God called me to preach. And then all of a sudden one day, a guy calls out of the blue and he's like, hey, we have this evangelistic team. Do you want to travel? Prayed about it, talked to my dad. Yeah, I think that'd be a great experience. Has God called me to evangelism? I don't know. I'll just take the experience. And then I had that summer experience. And then the next summer, they were like, oh, we want to start a second team. Will you lead the team? And I'm like, oh, I didn't see that coming. Okay, prayed about it. And then I led an evangelistic team. And I did that for 4 summers. And then the school I was going to, they were like, oh, we'd love to have someone go into like youth evangelism and preach in schools and camps. And would you consider that position? And then, so we went on the road for about 12 years in evangelism. And then I had a health issue and had to come off the road. And then God sent us to our first it's all, the whole world's the missions context, right? But God sent us to Hawaii. And I was just a chaplain in a Christian school. And then people got saved. And then students and parents were like, well, where's your church? And I'm like, I don't have a church. I did. Well, when are you going to start one? And I'm like, well, I didn't come to Hawaii to start. And finally, that was happening so much, and so maybe I should pray about this, and prayed about it, and eventually that led to a church plant. So that church is still there 25 years later. And then it was in that church plant that God gave us Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Thai, Vietnamese, just all these Asian people groups. And for the first time in my life, I saw people get saved out of like Hinduism and Buddhism and Shintoism and Catholicism. And I grew up in the Midwest, right? In Indiana. We don't deal with typically those kinds of religions and religious persuasions. And so it was just like, this is wonderful when you see someone that has been grown up underneath the oppression of a false religion, and they study the Word of God, and the light comes on, and they get saved, and you disciple them. And so it was there that God started really sowing the seed. So there was evangelism and church planting, and now there's Pacific Rim missions. And it's like, how did we get here? Oh, and you look back and it's like the fingerprint of God is all over my life and experiences, from evangelism to church planting in Hawaii to developing a love for the Asian people. And so, first point today, just let God take you and mold you and use you and shape you and put his fingerprint on your life, because you are uniquely qualified in missions because God has called you and he wants you to be exactly who you are. So now let's talk about some, the bulk of our time, let's talk about some trends and contemporary issues and missions, things that we're facing today that, and again, this is from my perspective, and you know, I haven't spent my whole life in missions. I mean, I have, it's all kind of interconnected with evangelism and church planting and missions, but from the past 15 years and the opportunity that God's given us to do missions in Asia, I just want to share some of those thoughts and experiences with you and things that I've seen develop, you know, over the past 15 plus years. So first thing I would like to talk about is there's a dynamic shift in the world today regarding American missionaries, okay? Now, let me explain that. Do you realize that back just, you know, probably 70, 75 years ago, particularly like right after World War II, and then you had, following on the heels of that, you had the Korean War in the early 50s, then in the 60s, you had the Vietnam War. And through this period of about the next 20 years, so from about 1948 to about 1968, somewhere in there, particularly in Asia, because World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, those were all Asian theater types of wars. And of course, you had the front in Europe, but you also had the Japanese part in Asia. And during that time period in Asia, there was Asia was actually begging for Americans to come over and do mission work. Philippines, Japan, there were a horde of American missionaries that were going to Bible college, graduating from Bible college. In fact, many of them had fought in the war. And they went to those countries and were in those theaters. And then they came back, used the GI Bill, went to Bible college. And then Asia was saying, come back, minister to us, bring the gospel, just come serve over here. So there were thousands of American missionaries that during this time period said, I want to go do missions. I want to go back even to the country that I fought in, and I want to take the gospel to those people. And so the mindset toward American missionaries right after World War II, and I would, you know, honestly say all the way up through maybe the 80s and even perhaps the 90s, was there was this very welcoming disposition by most of the world to American missionaries coming over and participating in what now the world calls proselytizing, okay? They have these terms for it now. And so, no problem. Even you go back in the 90s and you have the fall, right, of the Iron Curtain, and then you have, that happened in the late 80s. So in the 90s, Ukraine, Romania, Russia, just all these open doors. And it was like, yeah, come on, it's wide open. So there was this prevailing sentiment of, no problem, get your mission support. Come to Russia, come to Ukraine, come to Romania, come to any place in Europe, come to Japan, come to the Philippines, come to, China, and it was like, wow, there's a lot of open doors for Americans to be missionaries all across the world. In 2024, that has changed. And it has changed drastically. Two perspectives. One perspective. Politically and geopolitically, the rest of the world is now starting to view America in a sort of a bullying, like, oh, it's the American world order, it's nothing, and it's American politics have taken on both a weakened disposition and I don't know, it's just kind of morphed in such a way that the world is not as friendly. Maybe that's the best way to put it. So out there, the prevailing attitude, and I see this now almost in every context, is a very anti-American sort of sentiment. That didn't used to be when I was going to Bible college. It wasn't from the 50s to about 2000. There was a period in there where it was very, very easy for Americans to raise support and almost go to any field in the world, except probably at that point still the Middle East, so and Arab countries. So today, very standoffish, very anti-American sentiment, and you kind of see that attitude prevailing around the world. So just not as friendly as they used to be. And what that does for American missionaries is it makes it a little bit more difficult to get into a lot of countries. There are requirements now that are being placed upon Americans entering countries that did not used to be there. Like I was telling someone the other day, in certain countries, you have to prove that you have so much money in your bank account before you can even get in. Like they actually make you show what's in your bank account. And in some countries, that's like $50,000. Okay, would you be able to go? Could you do that today? Like, you're not getting in unless it's like, that's a weird, it's just the way things are setting up. They're making it harder for Americans to get in, and on top of that, there's this prevailing sentiment that, okay, we don't want you coming in and proselytizing our people anymore. And particularly when you're talking about countries that are primarily Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist, or there's just kind of this attitude where you're not as welcome as you used to be. Now, I'm not saying you can't get in and that, the Lord may not make it possible, but I will say this, it is becoming increasingly more difficult for American missionaries to get into certain countries and even regionally to get into certain parts of the world. Asia, I'm telling you, it used to be easy. But now there are many, many countries in Asia where it is very difficult to get in as an American missionary. So Launching off from that, then, I think a second trend that we find is that American missionaries have to learn to be perhaps a little bit more creative in their in thinking about how to do missions overseas. If countries are going to make it difficult, then how can I be creative so I can still have an opportunity to minister? And so I find a lot of young people, you know, those your age that are seeking to go into missions, they ask me, Pastor Mark, what would you do? How would you make it, you know, I want to go minister, I want to go take the gospel, but if it's difficult to get into a country, then what would you do? How would you morph? How would you, you know, put yourself in the best possible position? And I think this is where modern missions is calling for creativity on two fronts. One, from the standpoint of the missionary, I think it's calling for your best chance might be an education degree, or a business degree, or a medical degree, or a humanitarian degree. Something to where when you do enter into the country, you also have the opportunity to say, yeah, I do humanitarian missions. Here's my social degree. And it's like, oh, cool. And I'm seeing countries go like, yeah, come on in. Hey, I teach, and I can teach English, and I can, wonderful, we need that, come on in. And in your mind, you're like, I'm coming in to bring the gospel to my whole passion for this is to reach your people for Christ. But if you try to communicate to that to them up front, they're going to be like, well, where's your $50,000? well, have you jumped through all of these hoops, you know? No, we don't want you coming in to proselytize our people. And in some cases, outright rejected or making it very difficult for you to get in as far as the requirements go. So, but if you can, this is what I would say, simplistically, think about bringing something else to the table, okay? So, for instance, when I go into Asian countries now, and they're like, and they are getting more restrictive, even a country like India. Like India recently, you know what they said? A lot of people are coming over from America, okay, recent development, and they're saying, oh, we're coming over as a tourist. But they're actually coming over to teach in Bible colleges and take the gospel to our Hindu people, and we don't like that. So we're going to start asking more questions about what you're doing, all right? So they have been. And I just talked with a guy who went over and taught a module for us, and he said, I had to plan out an itinerary to visit, show them. I'm visiting this place, and I'm visiting this place, and I'm visiting this place. And he just kept in the back that he was going over to teach at our Bible school, but he was also doing all of these tourist activities, and they were like, okay, we'll give you a visa. And he's like, wow, they were they were asking a lot of questions. When I go in now, there used to be a day 20 plus years ago when I went over to different countries, and it's like, yeah, I'm coming in to teach at this Bible college, and be like, okay, yeah, come on in. I don't do that today. Even me. Well, I'm a teacher. Oh yeah, we have a school, and at all of our schools we teach English, and they hear me teach in English, and so it's like, I'm going to be doing some teaching, and I'm going to be meeting with people about projects, and oh, you're a teacher, and you're helping our student. Yeah, we fund your school, and okay, come on in. And so there's just kind of this strange twist of, you have to be a little bit more diplomatic, you have to be a little wiser to Some things they're going to be very opposed to, and other things they're going to be very open to. And so you might want to think about, as this is trending. India, it used to be like they never had any question. You're America, we don't care what you do, come. And now they're starting to ask questions because this whole idea of, we are like a 70 to 80% Hindu country. Don't be coming over here and trying to convert our Hindus to something else, okay? And they're catching on to this. So think about creativity. Businessman, okay? You can't get into Bangladesh. But you know what you can do? You can go to Bangladesh, start a coffee shop, and witness to Bangladeshis who can witness to their own people. There's a guy that's doing that, and it's actually very successful. It's missions. He went there for the gospel, but it's like, you can't come here as a missionary, and you can't, proselytize, but you can employ our people. Oh, if they come to Christ, okay, well, you're employing our people. Just be creative, business, education, medicine, humanitarian, teaching. There's just a lot of different ways that American missionaries are going to have to start thinking about, how am I going to get into that country? And how am I going to offer them something that they will allow me to come into their country? That's how you have to start thinking now, all right? Years ago, come, bring what you have. Today, what do you have to offer us? I'm just saying, think about something that you can offer them that will sort of please their palate, and they'll be like, okay, yeah, we like that. Come on in, and we'll help you get in, and so on. All right, does that make sense to you? All right, any questions about that?
I just had lunch with a guy that's in a creative access nation, and he made the comment that the government there, which is fairly hostile, knows why they're there, but because they're offering something that's of service to them. In this case, he's involved in Bible translation, so they view what he's doing as a benefit. So it's kind of like, okay, I scratch your back, you scratch ours. So it's not always a case of them not really knowing the reason. Sometimes even when they do know it, they're okay because they're flip-flopping, they're swapping services.
Yep. And that's an excellent point, because before, here's how they saw that. You're taking from us. You're taking our people. You're converting our people to your way of life and your religion. And, they saw it as very hostile. And now the approach has to be, okay, I'm offering you something. I'm giving back to you. I'll teach. I'll start a business. Like in all of our locations, the things that saves us in our countries? Oh, we have a school. Oh, what do they learn? Oh, they learn English. And yeah, they learn the Bible. Oh, that's okay. They're learning English? Oh, you're helping our people. And it's like what you said. They may even know you're teaching theology, you're teaching, yeah, but we're teaching them English, life skills, So that's one of the trends here. Kind of anti-American sentiment. Don't come over, proselytize our people. Don't take from us. If we're going to let you in, you bring something to us and you offer us something. And I could go to country after country, Indonesia, Vietnam, Bangladesh, starting to get that way for India, China, most of the Arab part of the world, a lot of countries will be closed to you, but you can be creative and get in. And that's what we're seeing. That's one of the trends that we're seeing. Second trend that I want to focus on here is in terms of being creative, not just personally, how do you get into a country and have a ministry there, but think about being creative in terms of the end game or the goal of what you're doing when you do get in. Here's what I mean. So for many, many years, American Christianity has been stuck, and I don't mean it in a bad way, in sort of a traditional model of missions, which is okay. It was started, right, by the David Livingstons and the Hudson Taylors and the William Careys and the Adoniram Judsons and the James Calverts and all the people who left and went to fields and took the gospel and were very, very successful in terms of missions, all right? And then we're like, oh, well, that's how you do it. You just keep sending William Careys and Hudson Taylors and Judsons and Calverts and Livingstons, and that's okay, that's how you do missions. And you know, for many, many years that went well. But in the end, here's what ended up happening, okay? And I'll give you a classic example. It was not that long ago. I was talking with the director of a very well-known mission board, and he said, something just happened that left me scratching my head. So 30 years ago, we had a missionary come through our candidate school, he and his wife, and they went to a South American country, and wonderful ministry there. Well, the other day he called, and he said, do you have any candidates coming to, and he mentioned the field they were on. Well, no, I don't think we have anyone specifically coming to that area. Why are you asking? And he said, well, you know, I'm retiring next year. So, I mean, who are you going to send to replace me? He said, we ended that conversation. I hung up the phone and I just put my head on my desk. And I'm like, what have you been doing for 30 years? Is there no one that you've seen saved and trained and discipled? Like did you work yourself out of it? And he said, then I realized, even in terms of our mission board, which is your traditional mission board, oh man, I think we're stuck in a rut here. And this is from a mission board director, and he's saying, Mark, I think we have to get away from the philosophy of send an American missionary, replace with an American missionary. Send an American missionary, replace with an American missionary. And that went on for so many years that in the end, it was like, you know, if you're going to keep the work going, oh, American missionary. Oh, if you're going to keep that American missionary. It's like, I don't think it's working. And now we are left with statistics like this. Ready? Out of every 10 who are retiring, 8 are not being replaced. 80% deficit. Out of every 100%, you know, 10 that are going, about 2.5 of them, about 25%, leave after their first term. So you're starting to get these huge deficits on both ends, and it's like, maybe we need to change our focus when we get to the field. Can we still plant churches? Sure. Can we still evangelize? Absolutely. But maybe the dynamic shift creatively needs to be, when I get to the field, my first plan, because the first plan always before, right, was gotta evangelize, gotta plant a church, okay, I'm not saying that's wrong or bad, but I think today it's sort of shifting a little bit to, maybe I should have a plan in place first for how do I mentor? How do I train? How do I disciple? How do I teach them to reach their own people? And I'm just saying, from the perspective of our mission, we are seeing a lot of advantages to that, like train the nationals to do the work of the ministry. You can still send an American missionary, but have the missionary like engaging a lot of their time in teaching, training, discipleship. Like, this is how you plant, this is how you evangelize, this is how, and what you're doing is you're simply using the advantages like of, they know the language, they know the culture, they have character advantages far beyond us. Like, they can live without AC. They can sleep on bamboo. They can actually go to that part of the country and not get, like, you know, murdered or kidnapped or, yes.
It's okay if you ask a question.
Absolutely.
You see
Yeah, great question. And it's still, I find from my perspective, what we're doing is still a little bit novel, okay? For instance, I'll go to a church and I'll present what we're doing and say, hey, we're training 130 Asians right now, okay, for gospel ministry. And we're training them for somewhere between $20 to $30 a month. And inevitably, I'll have a pastor, deacons, people on the board, people from the congregation come up, and they'll be like, what are we doing with our missions money? You know? And I'm like, it's great to support American missionaries, but just get them engaged in the role of teaching, training, disciple. Like, here's what I believe the true philosophy of missions is. Okay, ready? It's very simple to me. Work yourself out of a job. You teach and train the people to do the work of the ministry, so you have to look for another place to go to teach and train people to do the work of the ministry. And so, like, even the McCurry Bible thing, we would never know about that except from the local people. Pastor T over there, Indian, from the Al tribe, the Naga people, he's like, he just told me the other day, yep, I'm traveling to this area. We're going to find out if this tribe needs a Bible. And he knows people and he accepts them. And so you're training these people, and they are the ones that are opening up doors and finding out information. And then on our end, it can be like, oh, yeah, I can help raise funds to print Bibles for $5 a Bible. And then guess who will take them? And guess who will preach from them? And guess who will minister to the people with them? So I'm just saying, it's not that American missionaries are not needed. It's just that I think the role is changing from, just hear me out, from the Hudson Taylor, William Carey, David Livingston role of go. They don't have the gospel. Give them the gospel. Start churches. Okay. Just being honest with you. All right. Number one request I get in Asia, which has 60% of the world's population. Okay. 4.7 billion people. All right. Number one request I get is not, bring us the gospel. We don't have the gospel. Asia has the gospel. Every single country in Asia has the gospel. Even the most closed country in the world, North Korea, has the gospel. Because South Korea has been evangelized. And the gospel is getting in through relatives and balloons and all kinds of, but they have the gospel. So I have no people saying, what's the gospel? If that's the case, I'd be saying, all you guys go right now, okay? Take the gospel. I don't even have them saying, like they did after World War II, send us missionaries. We need people to come. I don't get that request because, like, you see Filipinos, you see Chinese, you see Burmese, you see Indian. It's like, we want to take the gospel to our people. It's like, okay, you have the gospel. You have missionaries and missionary passion. Number one request I get, every single country I go into, we need teaching, we need training. We don't know how to interpret the Bible. We have it, but we don't know how to interpret it. Or I don't know how to preach the Bible. I had a pastor come up to me in tears. I simply exposited a message from Genesis, and he was in tears, and he said, I feel so sorry for my people. I've been preaching that passage wrong all these years. Thank you. I'm going to go back and preach it right. He said, I just didn't have any training to help me. So teaching them a good hermeneutic, how do you interpret the Bible? Teaching them a good homiletic, how do you share God's word and teach people God's word? That's the number one request that I get. And here's why. I mean, I've heard this statistic. I don't know if I can verify it, but it makes a little bit of sense to me from my experience. In the United States of America, we have one trained Bible teacher for every 250 Americans. trained, they've been to school, they have a degree, 250. In Asia, there's one trained Bible teacher for every 250,000 Asians. I knew of a Chinese pastor. He was pastoring in multiple locations, so many that he could only visit that location once a month to preach to the people. And he said, Pastor Mark, if I don't get someone to teach and train, I'm going to die. I'm going to die young. You know how many people he was pastoring? 30 different locations. The total of all the congregations together, 30,000 people. One. And he said, I'm trying to get to each location once a month. And we meet together. And it's like the gospel in the last 30 years, in particular in Asia, exploded. People are getting saved. I'm not speaking evangelistically. By the hundreds and the thousands, especially the youth. Okay? And so the church is exploding along with the gospel, but then it's like, I told people, they have a gathering of believers who've all secretly found each other, and then they're like, who's going to give the message today? Okay, who got saved first? And it was a 50-year-old woman, and she's like, I don't know anything about the Bible. No, you got saved first. You teach us the Bible. That's a breeding ground for false doctrine too, right? So think about being creative personally on how to get in and what you can bring to them. Think about being creative ministry-wise, because the goal now is not give them the gospel or be a missionary. It's how can you teach them and train them to reach their own people with the gospel. And so those are some of the shifts that I've seen taking place. And I think it's a good trend, right? Like, how are you going to reach the world? How are we going to reach Asia unless you train Asians to reach Asians? I told this statistic, I think, on Monday night. If you took 100,000 missionaries right now today, and you sent them to Asia, and every single day they told a new person about Jesus Christ, it would take those 100,000 people the next 130 years to tell everyone in Asia about Christ. And that's beyond our lifespan, right? So how are you going to do that? Train Asians to reach Asians. And I think that's the new way of moving forward in terms of what are we asking missionaries to do? Not so much plant churches, yes, there's opportunities or even evangelize, but how can you teach them the Bible so they in turn can take the scriptures and evangelize their own people? The passion is there, the people are there, it's just we have to be a little more forward thinking in how we do it. So that's kind of what our mission is about and is doing, and it's not the only way, but I think we should be thinking about those ways. Does that make sense to you? Any questions, thoughts, comments? We're kind of done, so.
Thank you, this is great.
Yeah.
I appreciate your perspective.
Thank you.
Very good food for thought.
All right, I'll be around today, obviously, and so if you catch me on the side and say, hey, you know what you said in class there, be happy for any conversations if you have the time. So thanks, appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Who's on for Tuesday? Stop recording button here.